Please have a seat. We're going to begin here in just a moment. Everyone, yeah, there we go. Everyone, please have a seat. We're going to begin here just momentarily. Thank you. Great. Okay. Well, I'm Luke Niforatos. I'm the Executive Vice President and co-founder at the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions, and we're so thankful to all of you for coming this morning here to talk about really prevention and recovery-oriented drug policy. Our CEO and co-founder, Dr. Kevin Sabet, former three-time White House advisor, will be speaking first, and then followed by Tom Wolf, who's basically America's leading recovery drug policy advocate from San Francisco, and also heads up our Pacific and West Coast initiatives in the United States. He will be speaking after Kevin from his experience in recovery as well. Before Kevin comes up, I just wanted to share a little bit about our organization. So the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions was started about 3 years ago with a vision for the country and for the world that we would create a culture of prevention and a climate of recovery in our society. So there were a lot of extreme pushes over the last 5 years for what we call extreme harm reduction, a focus only on the drug user and not looking at the more holistic picture of the effects on society and on the victims and on everyone else that's impacted, as well as a push to really, at the end of the day, enable the use of drugs and not try to treat the use of drugs and get towards a drug-free world, which we think is a worthwhile goal. So that's where we started 3 years ago. We were launched in New York City. And from there, we have grown. We engaged with hundreds of experts from every sector of drug policy, all the experts, scientists, researchers, law enforcement, recovery, prevention, everyone in between, people with lived experience. We engaged with these folks over the course of 2 years to prepare what is called the Hyannis Consensus. It was finalized in Hyannis Kennedy compound with our other co-founder, former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, who we gathered everyone together after 2 years of volunteer work from a lot of folks across a lot of different disciplines to finalize a blueprint. And you can actually go to our website at gooddrugpolicy.org to see our blueprint. But that is the product of 2 years of work at this organization. We're now in the post-thinking phase into the doing phase. And that's what today is going to be about, is what we can do, what we have learned, and how we can implement better policies that are geared towards prevention and recovery. So with that being said, please, I will welcome Dr. Kevin Sabet.
Thank you all for making the trek here out to the Mozart room. Very appropriate here in Vienna. It's wonderful to be with you and your excellencies. Thanks so much for being here. And we have wonderful representation from the US government, as well as other governments and NGOs and academics from around the world, as well as fellow NGOs working on these very issues, who've been working on these issues for decades. Amy Ronshausen and her team, Chantel from the Drug Free America Foundation, I want to specifically acknowledge, as well as our other guest, Laura Stack, who will be joining us for the side event, our annual side event during the day on cannabis commercialization. But as Luke was saying, and I want to thank him for all of his work in this, we really felt especially thinking about this during the early days of the pandemic, that there really wasn't anymore a Washington-based drug policy organization pushing for good drug policy. And the fact that we've learned so much over the last 30 years about what actually works, that we know that, when you pair policy, research, education, and advocacy together, that you can really create change. And when that's done with the climate of prevention and culture of recovery, that you can make a lot of progress. Our mantra, if we were to have one, and if we had a sort of quote above the wall, would be that we want to meet people where they are, but we don't want to leave them where they are. We hear a lot from sort of the more extreme harm reduction camp that our goal in drug policy is just meeting people where they're at. And obviously, we need to meet people where they're at. But the last thing we want to do is to leave them where they are, because they're not in a good place. Addiction hijacks the pleasure centers of the brain. It's a biobehavioral disorder, unlike any other brain disease, very different than diabetes or Alzheimer's, because incentives actually do matter. And your brain can respond to that. Most people respond to incentives. And if you can create the policy environment to get people recovery, and also, of course, start with prevention, then you could be successful. Drug problems are complex. They don't have any easy answers, and we're often given the sort of a silver bullet. And when we were contemplating this organization, the silver bullet at the time was drug decriminalization, full drug decriminalization, for example, in places like Oregon. And, while I don't think anyone in this room or anyone who supports us is saying we want to put people in prison simply for having an addiction, that's very different than sending a message by decriminalizing all drugs. That nuance is very, very important. And because your message when you want to decriminalize all drugs is that you're just gonna leave this be, and we're gonna just have people doing whatever they want. And that's actually what the harm reduction movement did. Is it essentially? And I want to actually go forward here. I'll go back. Is it hijacked what was essentially a tool used in the very early days of the AIDS epidemic, and it hijacked this term to basically now mean anyone should be able to do any drugs whenever, wherever, and whenever they want. And that is not really what true harm reduction is. That's what I would call is extreme harm reduction. And that extreme harm reduction has turned into basically manifested itself into three things around the world. We work in Canada. We have a large Canadian affiliate named Prosper, which is the Policy Roundtable on Substance Prevention, Education, and Recovery. And they see this firsthand in their country. But we're seeing this around the world being pushed. Starts with decriminalization, then it goes a bit to what they call safe supply, what we might just call pill programs. It's giving hydromorphone to current opioid addicts. Nothing safe about it. And then, of course, full legalization is also where it goes. And that's something that, this is not really the intent, should not be the intent, and wasn't the intent early of harm reduction. I do want to go back quickly. There is a policy pendulum. We're not saying we want to go back to an enforcement only approach, but we are saying that there is room, a lot of room, for smart law enforcement, that drug laws and drug policies have to balance public health and public safety. It's not about throwing everybody in prison again with an addiction, but it is actually about a science-based policy that does not, normalize drugs. And really, that's what this is about. It's about denormalizing drugs. We've had obviously a very infamous surge in the United States and in Canada of overdose deaths. But although we've seen a decline, this is a very good recent paper by our friends Keith Humphreys and John Calkins. The disruption in what we've seen in the lowering has to do with supply reduction. It's actually it's one of the biggest supply reduction successes. That's not the only reason, but a huge part of this is because the flows were interrupted and some countries got serious. So just like we know a lot more about treatment and prevention, we know a lot more about what other countries and all countries can do to stop addiction. It really has to go together. And so, again, of course, a huge part of it also is that, this sort of idea that everyone knows that now fentanyl can kill. That's going to reduce the number of deaths too, when you just have more education. Unfortunately, another thing that's going to reduce the number of deaths is that we've had so many deaths. And so the low-hanging fruit, unfortunately, you're dying less because your denominator of people is less. That's probably another reason, but I'm most impressed by the shift in supply and that shock that it caused. So, harm reduction, again, going back to that, was hijacked by people who wanted to legalize all drugs. They called it the black blessing of AIDS. So in other words, AIDS was a two-edged sword. On the one hand, a very horrible thing. On the other hand, a way to bring in radical drug policies. And if you look back and you hear what they talk about making prohibition work on their own terms with harm reduction. That any step taken towards harm reduction is a step towards legalizing all drugs. So this is, I think, what we need to be very wary about. We see harm reduction as an intervention as a means of reducing consequences rather than an end of themselves. And really, that's what it's about. It needs to be a means to get to recovery for those people that are very difficult to get to. Obviously, not everybody who has an addiction is ready for treatment and detox. We do have to be realistic. Trust me, walk with me on the downtown east side of Vancouver. They're not ready for treatment tomorrow, but you have to get them ready. And we're going to start with the show here, Tom Wolf, talk about that process and why that's important. The other thing we want to emphasize here is that overdose deaths are obviously very important, but also for every overdose in the United States, there are 5 non-fatal overdoses. We're in British Columbia, we're talking about the reduction. They're seeing record number of calls because of the different things that fentanyl is now being caught with, including things that do not respond to naloxone. So just like you cannot arrest your way out of this problem, just like you can't treat your way out of this problem because treatment can only do so much. You cannot Narcan your way out of this problem either. You need all of those things. You actually do need a rest sometimes. You do absolutely need Narcan, naloxone, and you do need obviously much more treatment and getting people ready for treatment. But alone, one of those things will not do it. We need to think about, what it is beyond the mitigation steps. We'd love to test every drug for fentanyl, but that assumes that users don't want fentanyl. And in the United States, the people that are still dying are seeking out fentanyl. So testing for fentanyl actually might encourage them to use, not discourage them. When you say warning, there's some kind of drug that's being cut with warning to the drug users. In some ways, that's an invitation to the drug users, because when your brain is needing that, you go to any step. This idea of safe supply has been a complete disaster in Canada. That's why we're seeing a reversal. And then finally, Measure 110 was the decriminalization of all drugs. We talked more about that last year, so I won't go into detail. But essentially, it was such a disaster that the most progressive left-wing liberal state, one of the most top three in the United States, reversed it immediately as soon as they saw that the average person who votes Democrat, votes very blue, did not want to see this. Just way above the national average in terms of overdose deaths, way below the national average in terms of treatment, violent crime, 4 times the violent crime than the national average when you do this. And the number one cause of youth death in that state became drugs. And that wasn't the number one cause in many other states. Nobody went to treatment. And this was supposed to be about treatment, not jail. So many problems. It was reversed, it was repealed, which is good, but it just means we have more work to do. And actually, if anything kind of put us over the edge to, I guess, be a glutton for punishment and start yet another organization, it was because of the hubris around Measure 110 in Oregon. How so many people with a lot of money, they were so sure that this was going to usher in an era of legalizing drugs that it actually completely fell back in their face. We have to start with prevention. If you don't start drugs before age 21, you're unlikely ever to use them. That's something that Joe Califano and Casa taught us 30 years ago. This is very, very important. It's why prevention is the cornerstone. We're learning a lot about the Icelandic model. I know there's going to be there's events on that. That's something we like to highlight. We like to highlight other ways for intervention and treatment as well. Recovery. We're going to hear about employers hiring people in recovery. There's so much we can do. It's absolutely a comprehensive approach. So to put a bit more color, a bit more sizzle on this, and we need to hear from our star of the show, Tom Wolf, my friend, who's the head of our Pacific division of our foundation, which we were so happy to stand up. So much is happening on the West Coast. You can read our entire blueprint if you scan or just look it up online. This is what Luke was talking about, and we're going to hear about drug policy from the street now from Tom. Tom Wolf, everybody.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you all. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here in Vienna, all the way from San Francisco. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about my story, my journey into homelessness and addiction and recovery, and then also talk to you about what's going on the West Coast of the United States. I live in San Francisco, California, one of the most beautiful cities on the planet. Also one of the wealthiest cities in the wealthiest state, in the wealthiest country on earth. And yet we have 8,000 unsheltered homeless, almost all of which are suffering with co-occurring disorders of addiction and untreated mental illness. And yet we spend billions upon billions of dollars on this problem just in our city alone. Just in our city alone, our public health department has a $3.2 billion budget for 850,000 people. That's mind-boggling when you think about how much money we're spending on public health to have such negative outcomes. So we're going to talk about drug policy from the street in my story, but I just wanted to talk about this image that you see on the screen right there. That is what we refer to, we took the European name as an open drug scene. Okay. The irony about this open drug scene is that this is the United States federal building right here that has law enforcement offices, public health offices for the country, for the federal government here. And right here in this building is a methadone clinic. So if you're trying to be in recovery and you need to go get your methadone at a methadone clinic, you had to walk through this open drug scene to get your methadone, which is also littered with organized drug dealers there. take your methadone and then walk out through a gauntlet of organized drug dealers and other people that are using illicit substances like heroin, now fentanyl. We really don't use heroin anymore in California, by the way. It's all fentanyl now. So as a person in recovery myself, and just to the plain person that may not know a lot about drugs, drug policy, et cetera, how's anyone supposed to ever stay sober, stay in recovery, having to walk through and experience that environment every single day? Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, how fast can homelessness really happen? In 2015, I had surgery on my foot. I had 2 titanium screws put in my foot. I was given a 30-day supply of oxycodone, which I did not use as directed. I got addicted to that substance. And as I was running out, I got really nervous. So I decided that I was going to try to figure out where I could buy more of these pills on the street because my doctor wasn't going to give me any. So I Googled it. Where can I buy pills on the street in San Francisco? And it actually told me exactly where to go. And I drove down to the Tenderloin neighborhood, which is kind of our rough neighborhood down there. And sure enough, there were 5 or 6 people on the street selling a variety of different opioids, from 80 milligram oxycodone tablets all the way down to 10 milligram Roxys, 30 milligram Roxys, Opanas, Percocets, etc., all widely available on the street. That was in 2015. Now, unfortunately, all those pills are gone. Everything has been replaced by illicit fentanyl. Everything. And I'll talk more about that. I started off purchasing pills on the street. Over time, my addiction grew until I was taking, at my peak, 560 milligrams of oxycodone every single day just to stay well. So this is what people don't understand. Many people don't understand that addiction is a progressive disease. You also build up tolerance to the drug that you're using, so you end up using more. So again, I was taking 560 milligrams a day at $30 a pill. That's 80 milligram pills a day, $210 a day times 7 days a week. So over the course of a couple of years, I spent easily $100,000 on drugs, bankrupted myself. Of course, when my wife found out that it went bad for me, I ended up on the street. My house was in foreclosure. My wife put a restraining order on me. Started committing crimes to support my addiction, and that right there is my mugshot from June 23rd, 2018. And the next day, June 24th, 2018, was the first day of the rest of my life. That was the first day of my recovery. I haven't used drugs since June 24th, 2018. Okay. Thank you. So how did I end up becoming a recovery advocate and an activist? I'll just touch on this really quick. I want to speak to you about the power of social media and how we can influence policy. Okay. I'm what I call an accidental advocate. I was looking for a job, and back then when you get arrested in San Francisco, they would post your mugshot on Twitter. So this is actually from the San Francisco Police Department. That's my mugshot on Twitter right there. Watch out for Tom Wolf. He's a bad guy, And so in recovery, I had to own that, because if you Googled my name, Tom Wolf, San Francisco, the only thing that was going to come up was my mugshot. How am I going to get a job? So I owned it. I said, I'm now in recovery. I'm 8 months clean and sober. Thank you guys for helping me turn my life around. And it went viral on Twitter. And someone posted it on Reddit. And it was the 3rd most viewed Reddit post in the world that day. I don't know why, but it just was. And then I had CNN knocking on my door, ABC, all the network news and everything. And my story became a national story. And I just decided to keep talking about my experience and the challenges that people face on the street, how drug addiction is much more prevalent in homelessness than we've all been led to believe, how drug addiction is one of the primary causes of homelessness, and that we all have the power and the ability to recover. I'll just say now, I've been to the White House a couple of times, 2 different administrations, talk about drug policy. That's me and my family on the right mucking about in Mexico. I have since reconciled with my wife and kids. That is the power of recovery. But on the left, you have to see the things I had to go through to get there. So aside from being homeless, I got arrested 6 times. I had to do 3 months in jail. Jail's not great, okay? It's not. There's no recovery in jail. But it was a catalyst for my recovery, in that I was held accountable for the things that I was doing. I wasn't just on the street using drugs, not bothering anybody. No, 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 no. I was shoplifting. I was stealing. I was holding drugs for dealers as a mule. I was breaking the law. And this is the thing that people think about when you hear everyone say, you know, we should decriminalize drug use. You're criminalizing the homelessness. You have to understand it's not illegal to be homeless. It's not illegal to be a drug addict. I know this because I was both of those things. But the negative behaviors that you exhibit as a result of your drug use, you must be held accountable for, one way or the other. Otherwise, why do we have laws? What is then to say is stopping you from committing a crime if they're not going to hold this person accountable? Why should you be held accountable for the same thing if you commit the same crime? So you have to figure out that balance, and we have yet to figure that out in the United States. We continue to careen towards more progressive policies around decriminalization and the intersection of crime and negative behaviors and drugs and homelessness. And we basically have created, unfortunately, a two-tier justice system for people that are experiencing addiction and homelessness because their solution isn't mandated treatment, it's a diversion program. Diversion program, I've been to a diversion, does anyone know what a diversion program is? Yes, a couple of you. Okay, so you get arrested, and instead of going to jail, they say, hey, you know, we're going to send you to this program over here. They're going to help you with housing and help you figure out treatment. So when I got sent to a diversion program, I had to go once a week. I was in jail for 4 days. They let me out of jail. I was in withdrawal. I had to run and go get my heroin, right? Then I went to the diversion place all high. And then the case manager said, hey, how you doing? I said, I'm fine. He goes, do you need any help? No, not really. Good. Oh, here's a bag of chips. Come back next week. Check the box that I showed up. Came back a week later, same thing. Check the box. That's diversion. In San Francisco, that's diversion. Okay. What did that do? That just told me, as someone experiencing homelessness and using drugs, that, hey, I found a little racket here. I can just comply and stay out of jail, and I can go back to the corner and keep using all the drugs I want, and nobody's going to bother me because I'm in compliance. Right? Okay. So here's the reality of homelessness for 6 years, since the time that I was on the street until a year and a half ago. Outreach. 85% of all the outreach on the street in most cities in the United States is still done by the police. Period. End of story. You know, the way that people talk about, we have to decriminalize, we can't have you can't criminalize the homelessness, the police shouldn't be involved. Yet 85% of all the outreach done to the homeless on the streets of our biggest cities across the country is done by the police. And then we have nonprofits walking around, pulling red wagons, handing out what they call drug kits. You know what a drug kit is? It's a clean needle. It's a glass rod pipe to smoke crack or meth, or a bubble pipe for methamphetamine, along with a screen, a push rod, some condoms, some saline to mix your drugs, and a tourniquet so you can shoot up. And they were handing them out like candy to people living on the street, actively using drugs. And they call that harm reduction. Okay. And then you had some religious groups walking around handing out sandwiches, praying over people. But if you ask any of them, hey, I think I'm ready to go to treatment. Can you help me find a bed? They would all say, oh, I don't know. Go down to 1080 Howard Street and talk to the Department of Public Health. It's like, man, I was homeless on the corner. You think I'm going to walk 6 blocks and go talk to some city department about accessing treatment? No, I need somebody out there to intervene, to actually say, yeah, get into this van right now. We'll have you in a detox bed in 3 hours. That process does not exist, even to this day, in every major city on the West Coast of the United States. Okay. Okay, so you hear this a lot. We need to shift our focus, and I heard it yesterday in the plenary. We need to have our drug policy needs to be evidence-based, based in a public health approach and human rights. Okay, I'm down with that. But California and other states began treating addiction and crime through a public health strategy instead of relying on the justice system. So here's the problem. The lack of judicial consequences created challenges leading to reported adverse outcomes and perceptions of policy failure. Efforts to address crime through public health require adjustments and balancing new strategies with traditional justice responses for effective reform. In layman's terms, it means that we need to have a balance. Okay, we can't treat crime just with a public health approach. You can treat addiction with a public health approach, but if I go and steal to support my addiction, how's public health going to address the actual crime that I committed? That's the challenge, and that's the balance that we must strike between policing and public health. So far, like the only country that I've seen do anything even remotely close to this in Europe is the Netherlands. They kind of sort of are on the right track, it seems like, right? But at the same time, Europe has not experienced the advent of illicit fentanyl in their communities either. And I hope that never actually happens. Okay, the big problem in the United States, of course, is fentanyl. Fentanyl has completely replaced heroin on the street. You cannot find black tar heroin on the west coast of the United States anymore. Everything is now illicit fentanyl. In 1 year, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol intercepted 20 metric tons of fentanyl coming across the border in 2023. That number has dropped by more than 55% in the last year. But if you think about it, that's only about 10% of what actually got through. So you got to figure 200 metric tons are getting through every single year in the United States. How much saturation does the United States have? So even if we start choking off the supply like we're doing now from other countries, there's probably a few years of supply of fentanyl left in the United States that we're going to get to enjoy before we actually really see a precipitous decline in some of the harms that are being created from fentanyl use. Okay, the drug market began to change in 2018. You see the overdose deaths started to increase. These numbers are for San Francisco. In 2018, we had 259 ODs. This year, we're at 647 with like 3 that are outstanding. So even now, with the decline nationally around overdose deaths, San Francisco and the West Coast has not seen a decline. Why haven't they seen a decline? Policy, period. The failure to admit that drugs play a much bigger role in homelessness. Drugs must be addressed through a criminal justice framework alongside a public health framework. It can't just be one or the other. I thought we had learned that lesson with the war on drugs, but we decided to swing the pendulum all the way to the other side with radical harm reduction, and then we should talk about that. And I think Kevin had talked about it a little bit earlier. Okay, I've traveled all over the United States, and I've been to now several different European countries, Canada, etc. Everywhere I go, the definition of harm reduction is different. Okay, we define it in San Francisco as supporting drug users, giving them clean supplies, not holding them accountable for their behavior. Canada and Vancouver, they're like, we're going to give you Dilaudid. We're going to give you hydromorphone. That's harm reduction to use for free. You punch in a code in a machine and eat like a vending machine. It spits out Dilaudid pills for you to take. That's their interpretation of harm reduction. Whereas in San Antonio, Texas, their interpretation of harm reduction is, oh, you had a beer? Okay, that's okay. We're going to let that slide. That's their version of harm reduction. But giving out free pills or free crack pipes in San Antonio is like unthinkable as a harm reduction tool. Whereas in San Francisco and other places, it's fine. Just to show you how far it's gone, this right here, this is no overdose. You see the image right there? Okay, this was an ad campaign sponsored by the Department of Public Health in San Francisco in 2020, 2021. They spent $2 million on it. They basically went out and took a picture of a bunch of homeless people. I know that guy right there. I know him. I used to use on the street with him in 2018. I know that. You know where that guy is now? He's in prison for attempted murder. They actually are saying, do it with friends, with a bunch of homeless people, happy, tying a tourniquet, getting ready to stick a needle in their arm. Is that the message that you want to send to your kids? They posted this on every bus stop in San Francisco. They posted it on billboards when you were coming off of the freeways, and you would see that. Is that the message you want to send to the public, that it's okay? Do it with friends? That was our public health response. That was our version of harm reduction in San Francisco. And this caused an uproar. Of course it did. And this is one of the main reasons I really got super involved as somebody that used to use on the street, because this was crazy. And it's low-key exploitation of the homeless to boot. I mean, did they pay them to take that picture? And if they did pay them, did they use that money to buy drugs? Your tax dollars paying for that. That's the question that I pose to people. This is New York City on the right. Don't be ashamed. You are using, be empowered that you're using safely. Like, I should be empowered that I'm going to actually put a bunch of fentanyl on a piece of aluminum foil, light it up, and inhale the vapors every 90 minutes. I should feel empowered that I'm completely destroying my life by injecting fentanyl into my veins every 2 hours. Is that the message that we're sending? Just because I'm using a clean needle to do it, I should feel good about that? Like, yeah, I did good today. I shot up 5 times, but I used a clean needle each time. Yay me. That's literally the public health message that's being sent across the United States in regards to drug use. And it should infuriate you. It should infuriate you because it does for me as someone in recovery. This is infuriating. As a former intravenous drug user, I have the scars on my arms to prove it. This is absolutely infuriating, and it completely marginalizes people in recovery because it's basically sending the message that it's okay if you use drugs. Recovery is just a bonus, you know? So if you never find recovery, it's okay. We got your back no matter what. Here's some more supplies. Keep using. Oh, here's some free drugs too to keep using. You just stay right there and be comfortable and do what we tell you to do. Okay, where is the recovery? Where's the drug prevention? Is anyone listening? Can cities like San Francisco change? Yes, they can. Through my advocacy and the advocacy of others, we got a new mayor elected in San Francisco who's a moderate. He's a middle of the road pragmatist politically. First thing that we did is we brought forward legislation to change San Francisco's official drug policy from harm reduction to recovery first. It passed our city council unanimously, actually by a 9-1 vote, and our mayor signed it into law last year. So now San Francisco is a recovery first city. We're no longer a harm reduction city. We still have harm reduction approaches, but our overarching goal is to promote recovery from addictions. We hosted a recovery summit that brought over 500 people into one space, mostly from the recovery community. We basically activated our recovery community in San Francisco. Everyone that used to use, we brought them forward. We had Kevin come out and speak at this event. We had the former mayor, the current mayor, a bunch of local politicians, et cetera, there to let people know that recovery is possible and that it was time for us to pivot towards a recovery first model. We got the public distribution of drug supplies, pipes, foil, and straws. We got them banned. Earlier in late 2025, they got banned in San Francisco. So now if you want to get your free crack pipe, you actually have to go to a center, a harm reduction center, and speak to a case manager or a counselor about treatment first to start that conversation, and then you can have your clean drug supply. So we're not stopping the harm reduction. We're just modifying the way that they obtain those materials so that they actually have to go to talk to someone about treatment first. So we didn't ban harm reduction. We just put recovery in front of it for a change. We opened San Francisco, in conjunction with the Salvation Army, opened the city's first clean and sober homeless shelter, which means that in order to come in, you had to agree to put down the drugs, submit to drug testing, and if you were on medication-assisted treatment, like Suboxone, buprenorphine, you could come to the program. And all our critics, all the harm reduction people and public health, they were all against this. They were like, nobody's going to use it. If you say everybody's on drugs, nobody's going to use it. It's going to sit empty and you're wasting your money. It's full. There's a waiting list. All those people that were using drugs, because we incentivized them to seek recovery, willingly put the drugs down, agreed to go to detox, and then enter into this facility because we were basically offering them their own room with a shower for free. All they had to do was submit to drug testing once a week. That's all. It's the only rule. And you can't use inside. That's it. So if you use outside, you can use, but when you get drug tested, it's going to show. And even then, we wouldn't necessarily kick you out. We would offer you detox. And then you could stay in the facility. It's amazing how when you just create small incentives for people struggling with addiction, they'll take it. One of the biggest things I wanted to do when I was on the street was I did want to get clean. I did. But I didn't know how. So pretty soon I just gave up and I didn't care anymore. I tell people all the time that when I was on the street using, I didn't want to die, but I didn't care if I did. And that's the mentality that we have to understand, that people that are using drugs often feel. They often think that way. Do we still have problems on the West Coast? Yeah, we do. We have 241,000 homeless in California, Oregon, and Washington combined. That's 41% of the United States homeless population lives in 3 states. Somewhere between half and 80% struggle with co-occurring disorders of addiction and mental illness. So imagine you're on the street and struggling with addiction and mental illness. 16,000 OD deaths combined in those 3 states every year. 0 state funding dollars in California for what they call recovery housing, drug-free housing. So that clean and sober shelter had to be funded with city dollars. We couldn't get the state. It's actually illegal for the state of California to give $1, not even $1, for anything that's drug-free related in regards to housing, because of our interpretation of harm reduction. That's frankly, that's just crazy. It's nuts. Treatment on demand programs are underfunded, and 30% of all overdose deaths now happen inside supportive housing for the homeless. So we said housing is the solution to homelessness. So we housed 16,000 people in San Francisco that came from all over Northern California and the whole region and other states. Now 30% of all of our overdose deaths happen in those buildings. That should deeply concern you, because that's the policy that they want to take across the entire United States. And that's why I'm here. We need to stop that. We need to look at other solutions that start with recovery. Prevention first, then recovery later, and then relapse prevention to keep people in recovery. Skip ahead here. Okay, drug prevention and recovery must be our North Star. We need drug education programs for youth, primary prevention upstream, treatment on demand, expansion of drug courts, therapeutic teaching communities, relapse prevention, workforce development. The biggest thing that I found in recovery was purpose. Okay, and for many people that starts with a job. So if you're able to work in recovery, one of the greatest things you can do to keep somebody sober is to put them to work. Give them a job. Interdiction of fentanyl, illegal ports of entry. And now I just want you to remember, you remember those no overdose signs I just showed you that they did in 2020? We've now replaced them with this sign at every bus stop in San Francisco. Recovery starts here. It's amazing the work that we've done in 5 years to change literally the drug policy in the birthplace of harm reduction in the United States, San Francisco, from one of do all the drugs you want to recovery starts here. We have a long ways to go, but this is a big step in the right direction. My name is Tom Wolf, and I'm a grateful recovering addict. Thank you very much. We have some time for questions. Does anybody have a question? Yeah, we're all going to 10 o'clock.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.